Hello, and welcome to Abilities United presents Community Connections, a program dedicated to those individuals living with a developmental or physical challenge. I'm Andrea Thronson, Community Connections Developer. Tonight, our theme is building community. Our guest, Santa Clara Supervisor Joe Simitian, has been building community in California for decades. Welcome, Supervisor.
Good to be with you.
So, you're so passionate about your work. Could you tell me just a little bit about what got you interested in working with, people that have disabilities, with integrating communities? Where did that start?
You know, I can actually pinpoint it to the night. I was on the Palo Alto School Board, and we had a group of parents who were, quite frankly, unhappy with the way their youngsters were being treated. And they came to the microphone one after another, and they each spoke for 2 minutes, and they were getting nowhere. They were making no progress.
Right.
And finally, they sort of fumed out of the room, and I could tell that this is not working. And I did something I'd never done before, which is I quietly got up, walked out the back door, went outside, and sure enough, found them all outside, just,
Convincing
at a total loss
Right.
for what to do with these people. And I said, I think these are complicated and important issues, and I don't think we're going to get them resolved in 2-minute increments. So maybe we ought to sit down for a cup of coffee or go to lunch and see if we can't get a better understanding of the challenges your kids are facing and what we can do about them. And they were so startled. They said,
Oh my
really,
God.
you would do that? I said, yeah, that's our job. That's what we're, and
Right.
so from that conversation outside the board chambers all those years ago.
Wow.
Then we had lunch. Then I started working more closely with the community, ended up being a liaison from the school board to the special education community in Palo Alto Unified School District back in the day.
Right.
And really that was the beginning of, what I hope is a better understanding sort of the needs of that particular part of the community.
Right. So how, because you're so, you're so hands-on, and you were saying that that's one of the reasons you like the role of supervisor. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how that impacts that community.
Well, when I was off in Sacramento for 12 years serving in the state legislature and loved the work and loved the opportunity to have a statewide impact. But now that I'm back on the County Board of Supervisors here in Santa Clara County, it's a much different environment. And the work's very real, it's very immediate, you can see the impact. And so there have been opportunities, given the area that I represent, the northwestern part of Santa Clara County, to say, all right, well, what can we do to make sure that kids with disabilities, adults with disabilities, families with disabilities are really integrated into the larger fabric of the community. And,
Right.
and the thing I learned all those years ago is that if people with disabilities are an afterthought, then the results are going to be unsatisfactory. So. As I say, I'm in a role now where I'm one of just 5 county supervisors. I represent the northwest part of the county, and so when I see an opportunity or an opening, I can, pretty nimbly step in and say, wouldn't it be helpful if we were able to support Ada's Cafe, as an example,
Right.
In terms of providing some job skills for young adults with disabilities? Or, gee, wouldn't it be helpful if we could do a little bit more for families of modest means who need a little financial help to get to Via West,
Right.
which happens to be on a county park site. So the
Right.
connection's an obvious one. And, it's been very gratifying to sort of see the opportunities and be able to actually respond to them in real time and sort of at a ground level, if you will. And again, I think, all those years ago, I had a lot of good folks in the Palo Alto School District who schooled me, who helped me understand. And I remember the conversations, I remember one mother in particular who's still a dear friend said to me, she said, I hate it when people say, oh, I could never do what you do. And she said, and she was a parent of a
Right.
special, and I said, well, why? And she said, well, I know they mean well, but there's a suggestion there that somehow I have a special gift or talent that makes this easier for me than it would be for anybody else.
Wow.
And, I'd never thought about it until she put it that way. And I thought, yeah, that's, every single day you get up and you take care of your kiddo and you wonder, okay, what is it going to take me to give my kid a complete experience that any other kid would have, and to
Right.
grow into the kind of young adult that's happy and whole and healthy. And so, as I say, I feel like I learned a lot. I'm still learning all these years later, but what I learned then is sort of been put to use in the meantime, and I feel good about that.
Yeah, well, you know, I've seen in working with, because we put so many of our participants out in the community, and there are so many gifts and so many talents that we owe it to the world to be completely integrated and that's, I think, what you saw all those years ago. And what if you track history, you see that, you know, following your track, things have kind of exponentially gone forward.
Well, you know, at the risk of stating the obvious, I think things have gotten a lot better, but I still think we have a long way to go. And
We do.
So that's why, as I say, you know, when I see the opportunities, I try to take them, and I think it's one of the things I like about the place that I represent, which is I think if people have the information, if they get the cue, if they're in the know, they want to do the right thing, they want to be
Right.
inclusive, they want to make sure that the concept of community is as large and all-encompassing as it possibly can be. So really you just need to make sure that the word goes out and that people understand, and for the most part then enlisting their help and support's not that hard in my experience.
Right, you kind of ride the wave.
Yeah.
Ride the wave.
Okay.
So one of the projects that, you know, a couple years ago, we did a video, our television production class, at the Magical Bridge.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's such a wonderful place. You have taken that, and tell me a little bit about what you're doing with the Magical Bridge.
Well, you know, this was new to me. So, you know, that's why I say, you know, you keep learning, hopefully. And, you know, I had been approached, gosh, years and years ago. I was probably in my second term in the California State Senate, and I was asked for a letter of support from the Magical Bridge folks to send to the city of Palo Alto, essentially encouraging them to allocate funds. And I always hesitate before I do something like that because, you know, really telling somebody else how they ought to spend
Their money.
Their money is,
Right.
but I was so taken with the project, and I was so absolutely persuaded that it was something whose time had come, that I wrote what I hoped was a tactful letter saying, look, I understand you have limits on your resources, but
Right.
this is really a worthy effort. And so, you know, I feel proud that I was an early supporter even in that modest
Right.
way. Well, you know, the folks at Magical Bridge took off. They're a very talented group of folks, as you know,
Right.
and also very persistent in the best of ways. And all of a sudden the thing got traction. Well, by the time, you know, they were sort of closing in on the total budget for the project, I was on the board of supervisors, and they were coming up just a little bit short. And I said, well, let's see if we can't find a little bit of funding to help close that gap, which we were able to do.
Nice.
And that, of course, led to, you know, a marvelous Magical Bridge here in Palo Alto. But I was then started to think, and it was just from a random comment somebody made. They said, you know, you really that's great, but you really ought to think about it. Isn't there some way the county could do, you know, think bigger, think bigger, think bigger was the expression. And, you know, that was it. And then it just rolled around for a while, and I thought, you know, this really is what a playground ought to be. And you know, I think it's easy to dismiss a playground as the notion of an all-inclusive playground is not a playground for children with disabilities. An all-inclusive playground is a all-inclusive playground, meaning every kid in the neighborhood should feel comfortable playing.
Right.
Every kid in the neighborhood should not only feel comfortable playing there, but their family should all feel comfortable being there with them, whether it is seniors, whether it's other family members who have disabilities, whether it's the brothers and sisters where the abilities may be different.
Right.
They should all fit. That's what all-inclusive means. So I said, well, if all-inclusive means that, it also ought to mean the entire county. So how about we come up with a grant program and provide, we have 5 districts in the county that no one is aware of. I mean, nobody knows what supervisorial district that they live in or how many there are. But I said, what if we allocated $2 million per district from some county funding that was appropriate for that purpose? Then if we use that as matching funds, we could leverage it to produce even more money throughout every part of the county, north, south, east, west, and we could then multiply and hopefully end up with at least 5 or 6 or maybe more Magical Bridge type parks, all-inclusive playgrounds around the entire county. So that was the proposal. My colleagues agreed.
Wow.
We've just finalized the plans for the grant process, and we're off to the races. And I'm hoping that over the course of the next few years, we'll see them try. And my hope, my hope is that we can not only expand the concept around, we have the Rotary Play Garden in San Jose, but if we could do this throughout the entire county, then maybe other counties around the state or the nation will say, well, if Santa Clara County can figure out a way to do half a dozen, why can't we do it? So the hope is that we not only do a good thing for the kids and families who are here today, but that we start a movement, grow a movement, and see what we can do beyond our own boundaries.
That's perfect. Let's give the viewers a look at our TV production class did a video on the Magical Bridge. So let's have a look at what we're talking about.
So the idea originally came because I have a daughter, Ava, and she wasn't able to use any of the parks here in Palo Alto. And Dawn is a real go-getter in this community, so she said, we can do it. You and I are going to build a park for Ava and all the children like Ava.
It ended up taking longer than we thought it would take in the beginning, but it took us about 6 years to create this wonderful playground.
So I really enjoy the enthusiasm and the joy that I see on the children's faces when we say, we're going to the Magical Bridge.
We feel that all playgrounds should be like the Magical Bridge, designed and built for children and families of all abilities.
We are so thrilled at Milestones Preschool and at Abilities United to have Magical Bridge Playground here. It's a perfect community setting where our kids in Milestones can really help meet a lot of their developmental goals, play, gross motor, social skills, turn taking, you name it.
It's fun. I get to meet my mommy and daddy, my whole family, because I like all the instructions.
How fun is the playground for you?
It's very, very, very fun.
We had an artist from San Francisco create these stepping sounds. So as you come through here, it changes with different natural sounds like walking through snow, walking through leaves.
The equipment are developmentally appropriate for each child, and all the different equipment too is just a great way for the children to explore and have good gross and fine motor skills.
Differences disappear, and you start to play with children and parents, and you don't notice how they're different from you, but you notice what makes them similar to you. You can have fun in a playground designed for everybody.
Is the playground good for all ages?
Yeah, for all the people in all ages.
Or do we need more magical bridges?
Because we have had hundreds, really hundreds of communities around the world asking us for playgrounds like Magical Bridge, we are forming a new group and going to be doing exactly that.
Seeing this park be completed and watching both young and old people enjoy the thrill of being able to participate in play that otherwise they would never be able to do is why we did all of this. This park is all about magic and everyone feeling welcome and being kind to each other.
How exciting, and to think that we're going to have 5 or 6 of those parks in Santa Clara County, that's just, it's phenomenal. In segueing that, what would you say would be an ideal community, including, jobs, housing, integration, inclusiveness? What are you working towards?
Well, in terms of people with disabilities, I think, I want to go back to the comment I made earlier, which is, if people with disabilities are an afterthought in the conversation, then you're probably not going to have a good result. I mean, you just have to ask yourself, whenever you do, I have a background in urban planning, I've got a master's in city planning along the way, I'm a certified American Institute of Certified Planners. This is, and it's, it's too easy to sort of go towards the middle of the bell-shaped curve in terms of who you designed for, who you planned for. And you have to ask yourselves, all right, what about the rest of the community?
Right.
What about folks who may be smaller in number, but who have a particular set of needs or abilities? and have we designed a community that is inclusive for them? And you know, years ago I worked on an affordable housing project, and I remember, you know, people thought we were out of our minds because we were designing units for people with acoustic disabilities or with wheelchair access needs. And you know, now, I mean, one of the things so great about Magical Bridge is, you know, we've gone so far beyond that in terms of understanding the wider range of needs. You know, what about the kids and the families who have autism to manage, or what about the kids and the families who have other kinds of issues altogether? So where I come from, it is, you know, have you really been inclusive in the sense of the entire community? And have you asked yourself, you know, am I thinking about this in terms of how I can capture the strengths and abilities that people bring, rather than overemphasizing the word disabilities? Because I don't know a community that is doing so well it can afford to neglect the abilities of the people who are identified as people with disabilities, but who nonetheless can bring an awful lot to the table if we just open our eyes to that possibility. So.
Well, exactly, and it's like any large community. It has low income. It has, you know, there's different pockets everywhere, and each pocket has its niche of brilliance, and that's where we work as a whole, and that's where the system functions, you know, like a whole. It's like a tree with branches and roots and leaves.
I think, you know, you mentioned the issue of income. I'm going to go back to the school board days all those years ago. I remember when state funding was cut for transportation, so school buses were suddenly a luxury. And you know, somebody said, well, you know, we can just charge $200 a kid. You know, people can afford that. Now, this is back a lot of years.
Right.
And I remember saying out loud, well, not everybody can afford that. You know, a couple of youngsters, $400 out of pocket for a working family, a single parent, that's a lot of money. So, as I say, you just kind of have to keep asking yourself, am I looking beyond my own immediate circle of friends or family or workplace acquaintances to the entire community, and are we thinking about and designing for and planning for that entire community?
Right. Well, and if you think about it, it's, you know, it's the world has all different populations in it, has all different peoples, and that's a community that works, you know, amongst itself and can really function wholly.
Well, and you know, again, as I said, I think you know, we're fortunate. We're in an area where people want to do the right thing, but I think sometimes when people talk about, you know, diversity or inclusivity, they think about that in a relatively limited way. Could be gender, could be race or ethnicity, but those phrases or those terms mean a whole lot more than that, which is why there's an abilities and why there's a show. So good for you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of communities, we've got a member in the community who has created a very unique situation at his home. So let's have a look at what our television production class filmed over this last winter.
I'm Per Maresca here with Bruce G, who has created an ingenious hydroponic garden. So Bruce, what is a hydroponic garden?
A hydroponic garden is where I grow vegetables in water, where normally the plants will get nutrients from the soil as you water it. I add nutrients to the water, and so that feeds the plant. So it grows completely in water without any soil. So right here, I have a big tank, and this tank contains a bunch of water, and in there there's a pump, and the pump circulates the water and goes all the way down to the other far end over here. As the water flows through, it passes through the roots of the system and just goes back to the far end and gets recirculated. So
do you need to use any special fertilizer or minerals?
Yes, I add these nutrients. So here's some nutrients here that I add to the water. I have a seed and I place it in the cube, and then I put it in this tray over here. And as you can see, as the plants start growing, this is what it looks like after about 2 weeks. And then I transplant that over down here into the hydroponic system. I grow leafy greens, like I grow tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers outside, and those grow very well. For example, in New York, they have lots of rooftop gardens that are grown on hydroponics. So there you could have fresh lettuce grown right there in the middle of the city. They also grow it in other areas, for example in Alaska, where it's very cold.
On behalf of all of us at Abilities United, I say thank you very much for your time and for your very valuable information. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What a great example of community in our area. You know, our participants, they do a TV production class and they take those videos and they interview and do the questions, figure out who they're going to interview, and it's just one way that we're finding out about all the little pockets of brilliance within our community. So given that, all that we've talked about tonight, Supervisor, you know, when you were long ago, when you were at the school board and you were hearing those parents struggling with their problems, how did you know, it's one thing to have adversity and to have troubles, because that was a big issue. How do you, because it seems like your job, if I may be blunt, is taking a lot of problems and trying to find solutions.
Well, it's funny that you say that. Years ago when I ran for office, we tried to figure out what should the slogan be, and finally we decided the slogan was helping people solving problems, because that's 4 words that pretty much sums up the job description.
It is, yeah.
And you know, I think for those of us who are in public positions, whether they're elected or professional staff people, I think it starts with being entirely comfortable with acknowledging what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And you know, for those of us who have not had the same experience, there's just a lot we don't know. Yeah, so, you know, we got to ask. I think for folks who feel like the system is not always as receptive as it can or should be, I think it might be helpful for them to keep in mind that that's often a function not of disinterest or lack of concern, but again, a simple ignorance. And I don't mean that word pejoratively. I just mean people can't be responsive to challenges that they don't understand or even know exist. And so, you know, I know too many families, for example, who feel like when they go in to work through the IEP, the individual education plan for their kid, that is a confrontational rather than collaborative process. Yeah. Well, that's not what it should be. But a lot of that is a function of sort of not understanding. And so my experience over the years has been that if people will take the time, you know, and I want to be very clear, I'm not saying this in a warm and fuzzy way. I'm saying this in a very practical way, which is until and unless people understand the nature of the need or the challenge, they can't be helpful. Right. And frankly, we shouldn't be surprised that they aren't taking the initiative to anticipate and respond. So, you know, having those conversations may feel like it's a constant chore. I understand that, but they really are essential to creating systemic responses that are more inclusive and they're more welcoming and they're more helpful in terms of day-to-day needs and challenges.
So how can we as individuals, what kind of attitude can we adopt about building community and strengthening ourselves? What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say, first of all, it's probably a little presumptuous for me to answer the question, but since you asked, I would say I think it's important for folks in the community who don't have these experiences, who don't have this background, to own what they don't know. That's a start, as I said. I also think, in my experience, people don't want sympathy. Sympathy is actually a little off-putting. What people want is respect, and what they deserve and are entitled to is respect. So coming at it at these issues in a respectful way, rather than in a way that could be perceived as patronizing or even sympathetic, I think is an important part of having honest conversations with people about how you can understand more and better. And you know, again, maybe I'm just being unduly optimistic, but it's been my experience that in our area, people care. People are fundamentally wanting to do the right thing.
Right.
But again, we can't be surprised if they don't know. And and that respect needs to be two ways. And there are going to be times when someone's going to commit a gaffe. They're going to use language that's not helpful. And helpfully explaining to somebody why that's the case can help take us to the next step.
Right. Well, and I think what you're talking about too is an attitude of grit, an attitude of perseverance, and not letting life just take over, but having a stand and being able to make a difference and have a voice that's heard and make changes. I mean, that's what those parents did all those years ago at that school meeting. You heard the voice and change happened.
Well, and I think, just to draw on my own personal experience, I think the encouraging thing is, that change, that understanding stayed with me in my work. So they had an impact that they didn't even and couldn't have anticipated.
Right.
I mean, years later, it was the same group of parents who say, "You remember when we worked together when you were on the school board?" And I said, "Uh-huh." And they said, "Well, now that you're on the city council, our kids are older and they need a place to live.
Right.
So we worked together to create housing for young adults with disabilities on Page Mill Road, and it's there today." And
Right.
because they had a set of needs for their kids who then became young adults, we had a working relationship. I had at least a modicum of an understanding of what those needs were. And so, to anyone who says, "Gee, can I explain this one more time?" That one more time may last and ripple through the years that follow in ways you can never anticipate.
Right, right. Well, I think what the supervisor said is so critical, that people do care and change can happen. And it's about creating and building and sustaining a community where everyone's included and everyone has gifts and talents, and actually making the world a better place and a more joyful place to be. So thank you, Supervisor, for joining us.
Good to see you again.
Yes, very much. Thank you for joining us at Abilities United Presents Community Connections. Have a good evening.